5 years, and we live here with our 3 kids, Mira, who's 9, Ben, who's almost 7, and Fiona, so they're running around here somewhere. But tonight really isn't about us, although if you speak to the candidate who I'm about to introduce, he would say that it is about us. It's actually about all of us, right? It's about all of us restoring our faith in each other, in our communities, right here in our neighborhoods, and also really in our democratic process as a whole. And we know as Iowans that we have an extraordinary opportunity when times like these come around. We also have an extraordinary responsibility, and we always rise to that challenge, right? And it's going to be a long road. There's going to be a lot of work involved, and we know that. But tonight I'm not thinking about how difficult it's going to be or how far away 2020 really seems. Tonight I'm really excited. I'm really hopeful, and I feel really, really lucky to be able to have the opportunity to introduce all of you to Beto O'Rourke.
How's everybody doing? Good to see you all, good to be with you all. Sarah, thank you for that extraordinarily kind and honest and real introduction. To you and to Zach, thank you for opening up your home. To Mira and to Fiona, wherever she is. She welcomed me with a growl and then with a smile. And to Benjamin, you opened up your home as well, and I'm grateful. Thank you so much. And to each of you for taking a break from your beer at Carl's and walking across the street and welcoming a stranger from El Paso, Texas. Grateful to you as well. It's just been an extraordinarily beautiful day in every way that counts. This beautiful sky, wonderful temperature. We've been able to be outside at many of these meetings. This is our 6th house party of the day. And it is going to be the best house party of the day. So I'm glad I get to spend it with you. In about a half an hour, Texas Tech is going to take the court against Michigan State. And if Texas Tech prevails in the game, and then if they win the NCAA men's championship, they will be only the 2nd team from the state of Texas in the history of the game to win. The first team, and so far the only team from the state of Texas to win the men's NCAA basketball championship, was the Texas Western College Miners in 1966. Go UTEP. And among other things, that team is notable because it was the first all African American starting 5 to take the court against the University of Kentucky, one of the dominant powerhouses in men's basketball. It was the Cinderella stories of all Cinderella stories. They won that game, and the story of how they came to play and to win and to bring back distinction and honor upon my hometown of El Paso, Texas, upon our state, and upon this country is one that bears telling right now. And I have to go back in time a little bit to 1924, when a doctor in El Paso, Texas, named Lawrence Nixon attempted to vote. He had his poll tax receipt, walked into the polling location, attempted to cast his ballot, but was turned away because he's an African American in a state that had an all-white Democratic Party primary. And in the South, including Texas, in the states of the former Confederacy at that time, the Democratic primary was dispositive. Whoever won that primary race would be your governor, would be your member of Congress, would be your county commissioner. So he and every other African American in Texas were literally locked out of their democracy. Not willing to stand for that, he takes his case to the Supreme Court twice and ultimately wins. And 20 years later, almost to the day, 1944, he is finally able to cast his ballot in his own country, of which he is a citizen, in what is supposed to be the world's greatest democracy. 20 years of courage and persistence and patience. 10 years later, there's an extraordinary young woman who graduates from the all-black Douglas High School in El Paso, the only high school that she was allowed by law to attend. and attempts to enroll at Texas Western College and is rejected based on the color of her skin. And she too takes her case to a federal court, enlisting the help of Thurgood Marshall along the way. And in front of the bench of R.E. Thomason, she is able to integrate higher education at all institutions of higher learning in the state of Texas, and also strike down the segregation clause in our Constitution as a result. Now, fast forward to the Texas Western College men's basketball team. Don Haskins, Hall of Legend coach, is trying to recruit the best players in the country. But he's unable to do so if they don't feel that their talent will be welcomed, if they can't sit anywhere they please on the bus, drink from whatever water fountain they choose, sit wherever they want to in a movie. But Haskins is able to tell these players that thanks to Dr. Lawrence Nixon, thanks to Thelma White, thanks to Burt Williams and Nolan Richardson, who integrated places of public accommodation in El Paso, the first city in the former Confederacy to do so, that this is a town that is going to welcome them. And we did. And he built one of the greatest teams in college basketball history. So it wasn't just those 5 men on the court. It wasn't just Don Haskins in 1966. It was Thelma White. It was Nolan Richardson. It was Burt Williams. And it was Dr. Lawrence Nixon who made that victory possible. When we bring more people in to our democracy, into our country, when we are inclusive, when we celebrate talent and genius in whatever form it comes, we all do better as a result. And this very campaign, thank you. Thank you. This very campaign is premised on the idea that as we face the greatest challenges of our lifetimes, a country where millions are unable to see a doctor or afford their prescription medications, in many instances, though they have insurance, where one of the largest providers of mental health care services today is the county jail system in our communities today, where women are dying unnecessarily in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color. We're not missing the resources, the medical advances, the technology. All that we lack is the political will to ensure guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care to every woman, to every man, to every child in this country. Primary health care, mental health care, and health care that means every woman is able to make her own decisions about her own body. There are many here wearing these amazing red shirts who will remind us that we lose the lives of more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans every year to gun violence. No other country comes close to approaching these numbers. And so we can accept that this is an act of God or nature, or we're somehow inherently dangerous or violent or bad, or that this is a human-caused problem that has a human solution. They have shared with me that those states that have adopted universal background checks have seen a near 50% reduction in gun violence, and that if we adopted it for every state, for every person in the United States of America, we would begin to save more lives. I've also been told by those who perform medicine in our emergency rooms that if you are shot by a handgun and it misses your heart or a major artery and we get to you in time, we can save your life. But at high impact, high velocity rounds shot from a weapon of war like an AR-15, there's no chance that we can save your life, because that's exactly what it was intended to do. Weapons that were designed and engineered and sold to the United States military for the express purpose of killing people as effectively, as efficiently, in as great a number as possible, belong on the battlefield and not in our communities. We should no longer sell them to our fellow Americans. We have a system of immigration today that is denying the true potential, not just for families of immigrants, but for this country. A country founded in part on asylum seekers and immigrants and refugees from the world over. I live in one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. And El Paso, Texas is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States today, not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers, but because we are a city of asylum seekers and immigrants. A quarter of those with whom I live were born somewhere else, were called to us. Their very presence makes us stronger, makes us more successful, and yes, makes us more secure. So here's our opportunity. What if those more than 1 million dreamers who came to this country at a very young age, who are contributing so much to our success because they are not just the children in the classroom, they're very often the teachers teaching the children in the classroom. They're not just benefiting from those who are willing to risk their lives, putting them on the line tonight in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They're very often those service members who are serving tonight in Afghanistan and Iraq. What if we allowed them to contribute their full potential to this country's greatness by making them U.S. citizens and freeing them from any fear of deportation going forward? Republicans, Democrats, independents, small town, big city, we can come together and rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image to reflect our values, our priorities, the reality that we see here in Des Moines or back home in my hometown of El Paso. This is our opportunity, and it's right before us, and I know that the consensus and the will is there. It just needs to be reflected in our leadership. And in that challenge, which will define us forever after, because what we choose to do or what we fail to do will define the prospects of our kids and our grandkids and the generations who follow them. The fact that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels, and that warming is in part to blame for the fact that you have 4 times the runoff in the Missouri River Basin than you do in an average year, and the greatest level of runoff since we've been keeping records about the Missouri River. The 58 inches of rain that fell from the sky in Houston, Texas, which is the landfall record for rainfall from a single storm for as long as we've been keeping those records in all of North America. And that was the third 500-year flood in just the last 5 years. The droughts through which our farmers persist, struggling to grow the food and the fiber that feeds and clothes not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. The fires in California, the civil war in Syria that followed a profound level of drought not seen in that country in as long as they've been recording history there. These changes that we are seeing, that takes not just property, but human life, will become more devastating, more frequent, more profound, will undermine our ability to live in the cities that we call home today, and will visit a hell upon our children and the generations that follow unless we change course right now. Now this challenge, as grave as it is, cannot be met by half measures or by only half the country. If this is a Democratic Party solution, this is a big city solution, then by definition it will fail because it will require all of us to succeed. Those scientists who've told us that if we warm another degree Celsius and the train is off the tracks and our civilization is doomed, they also tell us that there are 10 years left to us to act, that we still have time to do the right thing, to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, to invest in renewable energy, in wind, which powers so much of your electricity here in Iowa, as it does in Texas, in solar, where we're building out utility-scale solar in my hometown of El Paso, and where the 2 fastest growing jobs in the United States of America today are wind and solar jobs. Farmers who want to do their part and ask to be incentivized in the Farm Bill so that they can make a profit and hold on to those farms and pass them on to their kids by planting cover crops, having precision tilling and farming that disturbs less of the carbon in the soil and captures more of it out of the air. If we lead by example, then this country can once again take its rightful place on the world stage as the indispensable nation convening the other powers of the planet together to confront an otherwise intractable problem that no other country is capable of doing. We can do this for ourselves, for the rest of the planet, and for the generations that follow. But if we are defined by our divisions, by our fears, by our differences, as this current president would have us be, instead of coming together around our ambitions, our aspirations, the resolve, the creativity, the hard work necessary to realize them, then we will face the judgment of our children, and their children, and the people of the future. At this moment now, in 2019, we cannot be found wanting. Whatever the differences, let us put them aside, define ourselves as Americans first before we are anything else, and do the business of this country. So the way in which we campaign, going everywhere, writing nobody off, taking no one for granted, no me importa who you voted for last time, to whom you pray, who you love, how many generations your family has been in the United States of America, or whether you just got here this morning. All that matters now is that we are together and we have the chance to confront these historic challenges together. And so I will campaign in every single part of this state, in every single part of this country, arriving with the courage of my convictions, but also willing to listen and learn from those whom I hope to serve. In that way, I believe that we can secure the nomination. In that way, I believe that we can defeat Donald Trump. In that way, I believe that we can bring this country together to do this country's business. And that's why I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. And I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind, to listening and learning from you. And I'll make sure that Cynthia, who's got a microphone, gets that microphone out to as many people as possible to bring your voices into the conversation. We have someone who's really excited to be part of this. Right back here, Cynthia, dressed in black with the gold zipper.
Who's excited? There we go. All right.
Hello, my name is Heaven, and I would like to know what you intend to do to protect church-state separation.
Wow. What a good question. No, I really appreciate it. I mentioned earlier those differences that could be of gender or of ethnicity or race or immigration status or of religion and faith. Who it is that you pray to or whether you pray at all. None of my business and I don't care, right? That line between what we do together in a democracy, where the people are the government and the government is the people, and then what you do in temple or in the mosque or in the church or in the privacy of your own home, there's supposed to be a division between those two things. And I want to make sure that we keep that in place. Right now, it is challenged by those who use nonprofit status, sometimes under the guise of religious institutions, to become involved in our politics, to advocate for a certain position, to use the fact that they do not have to pay taxes on their incomes, to weigh in on a political dynamic that is already captured by corporations and special interests who can effectively pay whatever they want to secure the outcomes of legislation and election. So in my actions, and by example, and in the way that we work in the White House, I want to make sure that we keep that division in place or strengthen it where it is lacking right now. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Straight down the middle. A little bit to your right. To your, over here on this side over here.
There you go.
I thank you for mentioning gun violence because I think that is something that is really important. And I would like to ask you what you would do as presidents to reduce gun violence, and would it be a priority in your first 100 days?
Thank you for the question. The answer is yes, it is a priority in those first 100 days. How about, for starters, reversing the decision that prevents the Centers of Disease Control from even studying gun violence? like if 30 or 40 years ago we said we don't want to study tobacco unless we understand that it's connected to lung cancer and death, and then we'd have to do something about it. Let's follow that up with, as we mentioned earlier, universal background checks. Everyone who buys a firearm in this country should have to go through a background check. We want to make sure that if you are at risk of harming yourself or harming somebody else in your life or in my life, that you go through that background check so that we can keep everybody safe. And then these weapons of war, let's make sure that they're not introduced into our streets. And I want to be really clear. If you own an AR-15 right now, I do not want to take it from you. Keep it, continue to use it responsibly. All I'm saying is let's not sell any more of them into our streets, into our communities, so that they don't end up in our churches, as they did in Texas, in our schools, as they've done all over this country, in our concerts, and in our public life, and invade the lives of our friends, our family, and those in our community. So those are the actions that I would like us to take. Thank you for being here. We love Moms Demand Action.
Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah.
My name is Sarah. You mentioned drug pricing earlier, and I wanted to ask you about something specifically. So obviously I think we've all heard stories about the outrageous rise in drug prices and people who are dying because they can't afford things like insulin and EpiPens. And I want to know, your fellow congressman from Texas, Lloyd Doggett, introduced a bill this session, the Medicare Price Negotiation and Competitive Licensing Act. And basically what it would do is allow the federal government to revoke patents when they find that these big pharmaceutical companies are abusing them by raising rates to these exploitive prices that are causing people to literally die across this country. So I want to know, even though you're not in Congress anymore, if you would support that measure and commit to reserving that right for the federal government to do that by revoking those patents when those companies exploit them.
Thank you so much for the question. Absolutely. It is otherwise inexplicable that we have some of the highest prescription drug prices in the world, though the American taxpayer is in part funding the research that goes into developing those life-saving drugs and the patents that the pharmaceutical companies own, upon which they are making billions of dollars. Their impunity is absolutely staggering. If you look at Purdue Pharma, just one of those corporations, they have marketed opioids to doctors and prescribers around this country as being non-addictive, as some kind of miracle pain-killing drug. Although it appears internally they use something quite to the contrary. This country lost 70,000 of our fellow Americans to drug overdose death last year. And though we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, comprised disproportionately of people of color, so many there for a non-violent drug crime like possession of marijuana, which you cannot overdose from, which will not kill you, which is legal in more than half the states of the country, or decriminalized in more than half the states of the country right now. And yet, despite their culpability, no one from Purdue Pharma has spent a night in jail or paid any real meaningful consequence on drug pricing. How do you explain the fact that we buy pharmaceuticals for Medicaid beneficiaries, Medicare beneficiaries, VA beneficiaries, military retirees who are beneficiaries, federal employees who are beneficiaries, and yet we do not use our purchasing power as leverage to drive down the price of those medications, and then we prevent you from being able to buy them from Canada or Mexico or the European Union. So yes, let's use the power of the federal government, including driving down the price or ensuring that those patents are held as long as the public interest as served, and if it is not, they are no longer available, to do the right thing for the consumer. I have met too many people, including a community that saw the loss of a school teacher who had insurance but didn't have $119 in her checking account, which was the co-pay for flu medication, and she died from the flu. People crowdsourcing insulin. Here in the United States of America in 2019, insulin developed by scientists in Canada, sold, I believe, to the University of Toronto for $3. $3 Canadian at that. With no royalty expectations or patent expectation. How in the world, almost 100 years later, do we allow people to die of diabetes in this country. I think once we all know what is happening and what is available to us in terms of doing the right thing, like Representative Doggett's proposal that you just raised, then we're gonna do the right thing. So I'm glad that you raised this, and I'm glad for the opportunity to act on this. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Still to your left over here.
Okay, I'm following Cynthia with the microphone.
Thanks for being here. So the scientists are saying we have 10 years. They're also saying that they agreed to, like, the Paris agreements, like, it's really not enough to keep us under that 2 degrees. So what sort of goals would you see yourself setting, and what sort of carrots and sticks would you use? Do you like the Green Deal that's been drafted in Congress?
Thank you for the question. First of all, you're right. The Paris Climate Accords will not get us to our goal quickly enough. It's a step, you could argue, in the right direction, but essentially each country was allowed to come up with its own targets, bring them to the table, and agree. But as important a step as that is, as insufficient as it is, the United States is the one country on the face of the planet that has withdrawn from that commitment under the leadership of Donald Trump. So day one, sign us back up for Paris, but then we need to go beyond that. You asked about specific targets. As close to 2030 as humanly possible, we have to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And the net part of that phrase is incredibly important because on this planet, we will still more likely than not be emitting greenhouse gas, but we have to pull more of that carbon out of the air than we are emitting. And that's where rural America, and frankly, the rural parts of this planet come into play. Their ability to grab carbon out of the air by what they grow and what they allow to grow, not cutting it down, not extracting the natural resources to compromise our ability to do what the planet needs at this critical moment, transitioning us off of fossil fuels as soon as we possibly can will require this entire government, will require a more conscientious capitalism, and will require our global leadership. Because we were talking to a farmer in West Burlington, Iowa, a couple of weeks back. And she says, Beto, maybe you're right, maybe you're not on this climate change stuff. But I don't want to, and I don't want America to bear the entire burden. And she's got a point. Even if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases tonight in this country forever after, it would be insufficient to meet our targets as a planet. And everyone on this planet is connected. China, for example, has 3 to 4 times the coal-fired plants that we do here in the United States. As India and Africa and other countries continue to come online and consume more, we're going to have to display leadership by example and by standing on that world stage with people as our allies, convening them and bringing them together. So we're going to have to do everything we can in this country, in urban America and rural America, and then we're going to have to do a hell of a lot more on the world stage, bringing other countries together. And last thing, you asked about the Green New Deal. Absolutely. And I love the way that it is framed and phrased. The way that they talked about this is meeting an existential threat with all of this country. And one of the analogies for the United States is the early 1940s. There was an existential threat to Western democracies from Nazi Germany. And this country was able to galvanize more than 250 million people, galvanize the other Western democracies to defeat Nazi Germany, and also to lift millions in this country out of poverty and into the middle class following the Great Depression. We need something on that order of magnitude now in the United States and in the world, because this existential threat is even greater than that one. And so we've got our work cut out for us, but I know if we come together, we will be able to accomplish it. Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Jordan. Thank you for being here with us. So, as you might know, Iowa has a long history of celebrating the LGBTQ community. But nationally, it feels like every time we turn around, transgender and other LGBTQ rights are under attack with the recent upholding of a military ban on transgender individuals. So my question is, would protecting transgender and LGBTQ rights be a priority in your administration, and what would you do to protect our community?
Thank you for the question. And Iowa, congratulations on 10 years of marriage equality. You're a leader in this country. Day one, let's reverse President Trump's executive order and ensure that transgender Americans can serve in the armed forces. As transgender Americans have been serving in the armed forces for as long as we have had an armed forces, saving countless lives, sacrificing countless lives, transgender lives in the process. And to dishonor their commitment, their service, and their sacrifice, frankly, is un-American. And I'll tell you what, it has a profound negative influence on the rest of this country. When our president speaks and acts in this way, Texas just debated a bathroom bill to ban transgender children from being able to use a bathroom, really an effort to freak out parents about transgender kids, though transgender kids are more likely to be the victims than the perpetrators of attack. And it visits more harm on these transgender kids who in too many instances are having too hard of a time at it right now. Además, when you add to this in Texas that you can be legally fired for your sexual orientation, when you add to this in Texas that recently we had 30,000 kids, little people, in our foster care system, and Child Protective Services was so underfunded and understaffed that kids were sleeping underneath and on top of the tables, and yet in Texas, you can be too gay to adopt one of those kids into your loving home. That's why, as president, I will sign into law the Equality Act, which protects the full civil rights of every single American, regardless of their sexual orientation. So we need to lead on this issue. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you for being here. My question is, who or what has inspired you throughout your life to be where you are today?
It's a really great question, a very personal question. You know, my dad, who passed away in 2001, was, when I was a little kiddo, was a county commissioner, and then when I was 12 years old, was elected county judge. For him, and by extension for us, politics was fun. It was literally parties like this in the backyard, drinking Coors beer. Now it's Budweiser in El Paso. It was people coming together. There was a real joy in politics, along with the power of making decisions that would improve people's lives. And though he's been gone now, almost 18 years, he's with me every day and every moment. The example that he set, the joy that he found in people, this optimism that was just contagious that he had about the future of our community. He passed on to me and to my two sisters. That's incredibly inspirational for me. And then I've got to tell you, everywhere we go, without fail, the reddest places on the planet that you can see glowing from outer space, they're so Republican. People are unfailingly kind and civil and decent with us. And they may not vote for me, they may not caucus for me here in Iowa. I may not be their choice for president, but they engage in the most civil way in one of the most unique experiments in world history, this democracy. So I know that the president who is in power now, I know that our national politics, I know that Twitter and so much of cable TV does not reflect the kindness and the compassion and the empathy with which we treat each other in our lives, in our communities, and in our cities. And so that is really, really inspiring to me. And I do my best to reflect that back in the way that I campaign and the way in which I serve. Thank you for a really good question. Yeah.
Actually, I just kind of want to say again, real quickly, thank you to Zach and Sarah.
Yeah.
Give them a quick
Yeah.
My only question actually is, the president this week made mention about windmills. And they cause cancer, is what he said. I'm not making this up. This is true. So, do you believe wind farms cause cancer? And I think Iowans would like to know more about your plans for renewable energy, which you kind of addressed.
Yep.
And does that include wind and corn-based ethanol? And finally, would you mind leading us for your curls. Thank you.
I was told by Zach that might be conditional on us coming here. It's going to Carl. So yeah, he said we have no choice in the matter. I don't think that wind turbines cause cancer. In fact, I think they cause jobs that we've seen in Texas, that we see in Iowa, that we see all across the country. It's really extraordinary. In Roscoe, Texas, just outside of Sweetwater, where I think they have more wind turbines per capita than anywhere else in the country, that has so deepened the property tax base that community has been able to fund early college education at their high school. 90% of graduating high school seniors walk across that stage with a diploma and an associate's degree, and some of them have an FAA remote pilot's license to perform the maintenance inspections on those wind turbines by drone. They're high value, high skill, high technology, high wage jobs, and those young women and men, the plow boys and plow girls at Roscoe High School, are working those jobs right out of high school, ensuring that they're both college ready and career ready. And wind has made that possible for that local economy and that local educational system. So yes, let's invest in more wind energy technology. It also means investing in the infrastructure to carry the power that is generated and to get it onto the grid. It means investing in the next generation of technologies to store that energy when the wind is not blowing, when the sun is down. Some country is going to come up with the solution. Maybe it is China, maybe it is the United States. I would like us to be the ones who take the lead and create those jobs and that wealth that will come in finding a solution, not just for us, but so much of the rest of the world. I, for one, still believe science and scientists, and they are very clear on the challenge before us and the path forward to meet that challenge. And it includes wind, and yes, biofuels and ethanol as well. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm really sorry we only have time for 2 more, and these are our last 2.
Okay.
Yeah, let's assume that you have the nomination and it's the summer of 2020 and you're head on with Donald Trump. What's going to happen at that point is that Trump and the Republican organization is going to start to position the Democratic Party as socialists. What is going to be your response?
So when I moved back to Texas in 1998, I worked in the community for a little bit and then had a chance to start a small business, which required capital that I was able to get on a loan, that I invested in the technology necessary to start a web design and online software company. Hired my fellow El Pasoans, a community that was awash in talent, but was one of the poorest communities in the United States because that talent had not found the vehicle within which to express itself. We took risk, we found clients, we worked our tails off. I knew as the owner of that business that I was always subject to a phone call from one of our customers or our clients. I had to make them happy, and I had to get new ones at every opportunity because my employees and their families, my family was depending on our success. So I'm a product of successful capitalism. I believe in capitalism as a power for good. I also understand that our capitalism has produced inequality that we have never seen before in our lifetimes, a concentration of power and wealth and privilege that is destructive to our democracy if it persists much longer. So a far more conscientious capitalism that allows for opportunity for everyone, women paid equal to men, paid family leave so you can take care of yourself, non-discrimination in the workplace, access to capital, not just for white men, but access to capital for black families who have been denied capital for as long as we have been a country, which helps to explain why there's 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America today. If it was redlining for mortgages and home loans, if it was Jim Crow, if it was segregation, if it was being pressed into convict gangs because of the color of your skin, there is some repair to be done, which can in part be begun by ensuring that everyone in this country has access to capital and the ability to build wealth and to pass it on to the next generation. So yes, I'm a capitalist, but I hope to be a conscientious capitalist who makes sure that our capitalist economy works for everyone. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
My question for you is, your state has passed some of the most restrictive laws on reproductive health care access. If elected, how would you help protect the woman's right to choose at a federal level to protect women in more anti-choice states?
Thank you. So you're right, in Texas, our state legislature and our governors have been successful in shutting down more than a quarter of the family planning clinics in our state. And not only has it made it harder for women to access their right to an abortion, it has also made it nearly impossible for women in some communities to get access to a cervical cancer screening or family planning help or to see a provider of any kind, because the problem is compounded by the fact that our state elected not to expand Medicaid, inexplicably because the federal government was willing to pay at the time 100 cents on the dollar of expansion. So I want to make sure that when we're talking about reproductive rights, we're also talking about women's health care. We're also talking about the fact that in Texas, we're in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color. That in Texas, since we've been closing down this access to family planning help, we now lead the country in the rate of repeat teen pregnancies. The deaths of these women, these outcomes cannot be the intended results of the legislation passed. So I hope that that is the common ground upon which I can stand with Republicans and Democrats alike to make this about healthcare, about women's healthcare, about the law of the land ever since Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, and to ensure that lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court reflect the rights of everyone based on your sexual orientation, your race, or your gender. You should face no discrimination. If you're not a corporation, you should have just as much power to influence elections and contribute to those who will be able to represent your interests. And every woman should have the right to make her own decisions about her own body. Those will be the conditions that we set for any nominee to the highest court in the land. Thank you for the question. Zach, Sarah, thank you for having us to your home. To each of you who welcomed us out, thank you. It's been a wonderful evening on a terrific day, and we are grateful. Thank you very much. Gracias y adiós y nos vemos.